Hey, everybody. I'd like to welcome Jen Weigel, who identifies as a spiritual adventurist. I've never heard that one to the podcast. Others I've heard call her the Angie's List of psychics, healers, and mediums. Never heard that one either. I always like to shout out to things I've never heard before. So, Jen, what we do here on the podcast is pretty straightforward, which is to discuss how the outer circumstances of life stimulate our inner experience in two very distinct ways. One is through the psychological separate sense of self that we call the ego in therapy. And the other is the divine soul connection to all that is. So folks might be wondering, why is it important to know the difference? Well, this is where you come in, Jen, as our guest to help us relate to this inner conflict within ourselves and give us ideas on how to integrate these two perspectives into one full, beautiful, messy human experience. So, Jen, again, welcome and jump on in and finish introducing yourself.
Well, thanks for having me, Win. And it's perfect timing because I just got back from being at the Celebrate Your Life conference in Arizona, where they were talking about bridging this gap between science and spirituality. And they talked a lot about heart and brain coherence, right? So
Yeah.
you're talking about that ego soul. And these, MDs and all sorts of people have all these slides of evidence that show how important it is to connect the two. You can do all
Mm.
this data to rewire your neurons, but if you don't have a soul connection to something greater, to know that there is a bigger giant purpose to all of this, to everything that's going on, those changes are not going to stick as well as if you bring in the heart coherence and marry the two. And I've been really toying with this idea a lot lately, Win. So it's perfect timing that you asked me to be part of the podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to hear more about the conference, actually. So, what drew you to that conference in particular? I mean, I can imagine,
Right.
but I'd love for you to tell.
Well, it's called Transcendence. And so I've started this, rewind the clock. I used to be a traditional journalist for years. I worked at NBC, ABC, CBS, WLS, WGN. I worked for both newspapers, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, did radio as well, had my own radio show. And now I do a podcast and I tell the stories that inspire me because for the
Mm.
longest time it was everything's wrong, back to you in the studio.
Yeah.
And it was literally feeding on fear. Like that was our
Yes.
business. Our business was be afraid, be very afraid, don't leave the house.
I
That
think
was,
it's still the business model.
yeah,
I'll be
totally.
honest. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very subjective. I mean, a lot of people go, "Oh, it's objective. You're in the news business." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's absolutely subjective because there's an editor for every story deciding how long it's going to be, what sound bites they're going to use, what agenda they have, what takeaway they want when you're finished watching or reading or hearing the story." So there's a lot that goes into it. So, sorry, my dog has just decided to move around like
He's got his own ego. I don't want to be on camera.
So there's so much ego in the broadcast journalism media world that you talk about the ego. The ego is running the show. It is absolutely I love the acronym that comes from recovery, and Wayne Dyer put it back on my radar, which is edging God out.
Yes.
This ego. And so Wayne Dyer introduced me to a woman named Anita Moorjani, who wrote a best-selling book called Dying to Be Me. And I
Yeah.
interviewed her when I was working for the Chicago Tribune. The
Mm.
Tribune wouldn't take her story. They thought it was too weird. She goes on to have, New York Times bestselling books, and she's competing
Yes.
with every outlet possible, but
Yes.
too weird at the time. So as we move forward and all these years later, she's one of the featured speakers at this Celebrate Your Life conference, the Transcendence Conference, along with Greg Braden, who does great research on the brain and
Oh,
rewiring,
yeah.
Dr.
Mhm.
Bruce Lipton, and Dr. Sue Morter, who has the wonderful best-selling book called Energy Codes.
All the big ones, man.
Yeah,
You were with all the big
it
ones.
was
That's awesome.
fantastic. They were all really important conversations and really powerful evidence. Again, evidence, like we're talking neurons in petri dishes and how you put a petri dish with neurons and you put sensors on those neurons. Now, these neurons aren't connected to a body. And then you put those neurons next to a microchip from a computer game, Pong, aging myself with that reference.
I
Remember
know, that's my favorite. That's my favorite.
like the first video game, basically.
Yeah.
So you put these petri dishes next to each other, and the neurons start doing the same movements just being next to the microchip of that video game as they did when they were put on someone's brain who was playing the game.
No
Yes.
way.
So this was Dr. Bruce Lipton shows this on the screen. It's like, oh my gosh, bottom line is there's a frequency going out of everything. Look, people
Yes.
are watching this and listening to this. They can't see the waves, but they're happening. That's
Yes.
what's happening every single day. Your brain is emanating a signal, your thoughts are emanating signals, but your heart, some say in the Heart Math Institute, 5 times stronger than any other organ in your body, also projecting. So imagine if you combine the brain with the heart, how powerful your reality could become versus just being in the ego or just being in the etheric woo woo. Like, let's marry the two and see what happens.
Yes.
That's where I've been doing some deep dives lately.
Wow. Well, that was a great segue into what we were going to talk about, the ego and the soul. And I love that you just dropped all those names because I think all those names are people to look up if you're listening to this podcast. I mean, they are phenomenal people. They've been doing this for years. They know what they're talking about. So I'm glad you dropped all those names. So getting back to, the point of the show really is to talk about your ego and how you overcame or transcended it to get in touch with your soul.
Right.
And you just talked about going into an industry that was completely led by the ego. And
Yeah.
so, what led you into the industry? What was your ego telling you at the time that it said, hey, you should probably do this for a living?
Well, I knew I was a good storyteller, right? And I
Mm.
came from a family of storytellers, writers, broadcasters. Some people have families of lawyers and doctors, and I came from a family of broadcasters. And so
Yeah. Okay.
broadcasting and telling your story was sort of something that was talked about at the dinner table every single night, but also
Mm.
what have you won lately? What are your accomplishments? That was when you could really share at the dinner table when you had something to share.
Oh,
Being
interesting.
worthy of sharing, which was, oh, well, I got an A in the spelling test,
Interesting.
or I got, it was all ego and accomplishment driven, all of it.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Wow, that's such a powerful explanation. Like I could see you sitting at the dinner table. I could see you believing that, maybe looking up to your parents, they're great storytellers, and then wanting you to only tell a story about your accomplishment,
Right.
right? Not your feelings, not maybe like what, stirred you that day, but just that.
Right.
So your ego is developing around this. You're going to be a good storyteller, and it's got to be about accomplishments or achievements.
Right.
And
Exactly.
you saw your dad maybe making those achievements in the media,
Right. My grandpa,
maybe.
my mom also, my mom was a news
Wow.
anchor for WGN radio. And before that,
Wow.
she worked at CBS News. She was always a writer. So both my parents have this strong, storytelling, writing, journalism, broadcasting kind of thread. And
Okay.
so I got into it. I realized that I could do it well. I started as a traffic reporter, the traffic and weather together. Like, hello, if I had
Mhm,
to say
mhm.
outbound Kennedy to O'Hare one more time, I was gonna roll off a cliff.
Did you ever get in the helicopter?
Oh, yeah, did the helicopter,
Oh,
and
fun.
I was
Oh,
terrified
fun.
of flying in helicopters, but I was up there, like, looking down at the accidents in the Kennedy going, "Ah." I remember the first time I did it, I was working at WGN, and I was filling in the morning news, and they threw me up in the helicopter, and there was this huge crash on I-57 where livestock was, like, running wild on the in the I mean, it was literally, like, talk about throwing me in both, head first. But anyway, I figured it out. I realized that I could do it well. I didn't enjoy the stories I was telling at all. So to get through it, I would pitch these other stories that inspired me about people who were changing
Mm.
the community or inspiring teachers or someone you should know or the arts. I was very into supporting theater and studied theater in college as well as writing and journalism. So I had like this double major of wanting to do these, again, storytelling. And so
Yeah.
now I tell people, look, the format changes. I'm either doing it on my podcast or I'm doing it on stage with my one woman show, or I'm doing it in, a video format or on my spiritual social club Zoom community or books or whatever it is. But
Mhm.
telling stories to help people heal is what drives me now. But before it was all ego all the time. And I didn't have any balance. And so when my dad died of a brain tumor, he was 56 years young. I was 30 at the time. And I just went down this rabbit hole of what's life all about? Like life is short. At any moment it could be plucked away. Are you doing what you love or are you doing what you feel you're forced to do? And so
Mm.
that's when I made the pivot to kind of stop telling the stories I was forced to tell and tell the stories that inspired me.
Yeah, you're such a good speaker, and I wanted to stop you and slow you down like 4 times.
I'm sorry. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, it's great. You're so eloquent, but it so going back, your ego, I love what you just said, because this is what I mean by like the ego can be integrated into your soul's journey. And you have to identify first, right? What got me successful, which is storytelling, is now causing me a lot of pain. It's not the storytelling itself, the gift that I have from God to tell stories. It's the way in which I'm being forced to tell a story that doesn't feel good to me. Is
Right.
not doesn't feel good to me. It felt good maybe part of the time to feel, I'm a reporter and I'm on TV or whatever the ego is thinking, right? But then we have these small journeys where we start to be like, this doesn't feel good anymore. My success itself. I have this happen all the time with clients. So like I got successful and now I can barely get out of bed. I'm having panic attacks or
Right.
whatever. My family hates me or whatever it is, right? And so I love, you don't have to change what you're doing necessarily. You just change the way that you're doing it, right? And you could have stayed even possibly in that media if you, I don't know, maybe you could have. I'm not sure if there was any option there. But
Yeah.
like ultimately you said, I had this moment with my dad's passing where it no longer became an option for me to only listen to the ego. And
Right.
sometimes I think when our parents pass, it kind of frees our soul a little bit to say, like, you don't have to be identified anymore by the parental advice or,
Mhm.
way that they created success. And so, I remember one of the things I asked you in the pre notes was like, what did you want your 30-year-old self to know
Mhm.
now, that you could tell them now? What would you have told her during all that time when you were changing?
You know, don't do anything out of fear. It's
Mm,
that acronym, false evidence appearing real, I think has
yeah.
a lot of weight. Although, hey, if you're standing in the street and a bus is coming and you're afraid, that's not false evidence. That's like, get out of the way. There's a bus coming. Okay. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff we create in our minds that we come from a place of fear instead of a place of faith. And,
Mm.
I'm not talking like the "Jesus is with you" kinda stuff, like fire and brimstone. I'm
Mhm.
talking about really trusting that there is something bigger at play here, and I now am a big believer that thoughts become things, and this is science. It's, again, the petri dish, it's matching frequencies. So if
Yes.
you're continually putting out, woe is me, I'm a victim, people rip me off, people rip me off," that then becomes your reality. Everything
Mhm.
is wrong. People rip you off because it's a matching reality that's looking for a signal. And it's like, oh, let's go to Jen's zip code because she keeps projecting this movie of gloom and doom. And we match there. Again, if people had any idea how powerful this invisible frequency is,
Yeah.
they'd change their thoughts so fast. It's like, look, I did research on this and it blew my mind. There are over 35,000 different types of gyms in the United States, gyms, like where you work out. Okay, because you can see the physical body. It's like, "Oh, man, I want six-pack abs. Like, I wanna go lose weight. I want us to do this. I wanna do that." But nobody is scanning the brain the way that they should, and if we could see the
Mm.
inside of our brains, whew, would we make changes. But
Yeah.
it's covered, it's disguised,
Yeah.
it's put on a smiling face and, like, let's all take selfies. Like, no. So what I wish I could tell my 30-year-old self is that, like, it's I've interviewed a lot of people who've died and come back. They call it near-death experiencers,
Yeah.
and one of them was hit by a taxi in rush hour traffic. Her name is Lisa Dietland. She wrote this book, "I Got Hit by a Taxi, But You Look Run Over." You should have her on your podcast. Right. But she literally, while she was waiting to be X-rayed, heard, "It's all BS except happiness and joy." And she was like,
Mm.
she heard it 3 times, and it was a booming
Really?
voice, and she was hit by a taxi without 1 scratch. There was no internal bleeding, she didn't have a broken leg, she didn't have a broken bone, she didn't have a broken nail. She's fine.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
again, she was caught by something that we can't explain. So I'm a
Mm.
big believer now that I would say to my 30-year-old self, "You don't even have a clue. You don't know anything until you keep asking questions, stay curious, get out of your ego and get back into your heart and trust." That's what I would try
Yeah.
to tell her.
Yeah, and probably at 30, she may not have even known what an ego was. But, just to keep on before you had this turn of events,
Mhm.
I want to point out the ego. does make you successful,
Right.
right?
Sure.
So when you said don't do anything out of fear, right? The ego does cause us a lot of suffering and fear.
Hmm.
But the ego also developed as a way for you to become successful. And so it's really hard sometimes to discern, right? Like
Right.
this ego that helped me get successful is no longer working for me.
Right.
That's weird. And I don't understand why. And does
Right.
that mean I should strengthen my ego, make it bigger, make it more powerful, right? Which a lot of people do. They think I need to get more confident or whatever that is. But that wasn't the case, right? It's you started to notice what I love doing, what my soul loves doing no longer feels good.
Right.
Right. And
Or
that there's a difference there.
I'm not allowed to do the way that feels good, right?
Yeah.
So my soul loved telling stories. And
Yes.
I had some ego program that said the only way you can tell stories for a living is if you do it in this news package
There
that's
you
like
go.
this way, right?
Yes.
Because the theater way was like, who's going to make money doing that? They would say, when are you going to get a real job? All that stuff. Like
Yes.
what? So I
Yes.
had to go get a real job, which was, and when I walked away from my real job at
Yeah.
CBS making six figures because I wasn't happy, nobody
Yeah.
could understand, why aren't you happy? You're making all this money. Well, guess
Yeah.
what? That's not what makes you happy.
Right.
So this false sense of security with a contract, with health insurance, with a salary was all false evidence
Yeah.
appearing real. But yet,
Yeah.
you said fear can be a good driving force. Like I know somebody whose entire motivation is vengeance. Everything she does is revenge against her ex-husband. Every move she makes, vengeance. And guess what? She's pretty successful, but she's miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Miserable. So
Mm-hmm.
I just tell people, like when I go and I do talks and stuff, I say, what's your intention? Is your intention to be famous? Then you're going to be standing at the top, maybe, but it's like quicksand. You'll sink eventually.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be honest with yourself and with others about your intention. And
Yeah.
that can be a foundation for hopefully long-standing happiness, but you got to kind of deal in to find out.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times we have two intentions. We have an egoic one,
Right.
right, that was trained into us and conditioned, and then the soul, which a lot of times people can't hear
Right.
unless they do something extraordinary. So let's talk about your extraordinary change
Mhm.
into being a more soul-based, intuitive person and the journey that that took you on. So how did you learn to trust and hear your soul?
So I had taken Reiki. I became a Reiki master and I took reflexology, and I was dabbling in the idea of doing more energy work full time. Like this is before my dad even got sick, like 1999, 2000. So a long time
Mm.
ago. But I was always interested in how the body worked and healing, and my hands would turn on and I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, well, I was too busy being a reporter to like worry about it.
What do you
But
mean
then
your hands turn on?
they would get hot when I was around
Okay,
certain people. They would turn on like hot pokers, like, and I'm like,
nice.
I'm 30. It can't be menopause. What's happening? You know what I mean? It's like, what's
Okay,
up? So
yeah.
then once I started realizing, when I took Reiki classes and I got certified as a whatever Reiki master, all these things, I was just doing it all the time in service. Again, goes back to intention. I wasn't doing it to be famous. I wasn't doing it to get recognition. I wasn't doing it to pay the rent. I was doing it because it felt good.
Yes.
Hands were turning hot. People seemed to feel better after being on the table. I was just kind of like cause and
Yeah,
effect. Like, let's do this.
I love it.
Then I stopped for a while, for years actually, because I had been doing it for my father when he was going through treatments for his cancer, and for my mother-in-law when
Mhm.
she was getting treatment for her cancer. And I think I just got burned out on the whole concept, and I was just like, forget it. Went very back into like, ego human 3D, like, and I was writing for the Chicago Tribune, and I just had like I just let any energy work go away. Then my son got some real digestive issues and some stuff. And so I started incorporating energy work back into my life with my family.
Mm, mm.
And once I started seeing it be helpful for him, I thought maybe I should bring this out of the closet and dust off the manuals. So I was like, and then I started studying all sorts of different kinds of energy work, intuitive work, and I started noticing, My clairs turned on. So what is that? It's like clairaudient. You hear things, clairvoyant. You see things in your mind's eye. And people are like,
Mhm.
that's weird. But you know what? Everybody watching this or listening to this could do this right now. If you
I
just
agree.
if you close your eyes and think of the childhood bedroom that you had, can you see it? Even
Mhm.
without closing your eyes, right?
Mhm.
You see the comforter, you see the carpeting, you can see what the curtains look like. That's clairvoyance, okay? It's not like a big
Mhm.
giant movie playing. It's a memory imprinted in your mind's eye that you can recall or that
Yeah.
shows up. So my clairs started firing when it was so weird. So I'd
Yeah.
be doing Reiki on people and I'd start seeing things. Like,
Yeah.
and so then I realized, oh wow, my wiring is opening up. You know, my antenna, like we talked about, my frequencies were broadcasting at different levels. And I
Mhm.
decided to do some more and more research on that because knowledge is power. So I just kept expanding on it and expanding on it. Next thing you know, I'm teaching about different, your clairs, how to work with them. And that's one of the things I do in this Zoom community is it's happening. You cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. Yeah, I was at the line at the bank when, and my teller starts telling me how she's a Reiki master. I'm like, hey, me too. And then she starts telling me how she's seeing spirits, like walking through the kitchen. I'm like, really? Tell me more.
Yes.
You'd be amazed. Like 1 in 10 people has had a near death experience. This data is mind boggling, and people are talking about it more and more. They really
Yes.
are. It's
Yes.
happening.
So you think two things are happening. We're both opening up more to these higher frequencies just because the planet shifted. I'm assuming, and
Yep.
also because, um, I mean, I guess why else do you think that this is happening right now?
I think that the veil is thinning. I think there's an adjustment happening
Mhm.
planetarily. But really, I think it is like the third dimension is turning into the fifth dimension, and it's like it's like we're going up an elevator, Win, and we can't go back to the basement.
Yeah.
And the view is much better and much different at the top.
Yeah.
So as we go higher, it's like we can't unlearn the new things that we're seeing. And that's what's happening. I've seen miracles, I've experienced miracles, I've interviewed people who have had miracles. All these miracles are documented. There's like 1,500 of them just acknowledged by Catholics alone. Imagine how many others there are by people who aren't under that umbrella, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for us, again, to say that we think we know everything is just ego. It's so arrogant. It's
That's
ridiculous.
right.
We
That's
have to
right.
understand that it's all unfolding in the most interesting ways, and we can't even begin to know. Like a fraction of our brain is working. I think it's like between 6 and 10% of our brain is working at any given moment. Like, what's the other 93? What is it doing? I don't know. We got to figure it out.
So, so as you went on your journey, right, you said it was prompted by a death and then it was prompted by other
Mhm.
reasons to want to heal someone, right? Like you're not going to feel good if your son doesn't feel good. It's just,
Right.
so you're kind of pulled in that direction. And then I guess when did it become your full-fledged way of being, where you're like, I have an ego, but I really, all my intention comes from listening to what my soul wants me to do next.
Yeah. Um, I started doing more and more one-on-one sessions with people doing Reiki and reflexology, and I couldn't deny sort of like that this information was coming out. It was accurate for
Mm.
the people. So it was actually one of my mentors, Carolyn Mace, who wrote the book, Sacred Contracts, Anatomy of the Spirit.
Yeah.
We were
Mhm.
having lunch, and I was telling her about this retreat that we did, a small retreat with about 8 people, and each person got on the table for me, and I was having these really vivid experiences for them. And she was like, well, well, well. I was like, "What?" She's like, "Perhaps you are now becoming one of these people you've been interviewing all these years." And I'm like,
Mm.
"What? Shut the front door. No, that was not part of it. No, no, no." And
Mm.
so, she said, "Look, I had no intention of being a medical intuitive," right? She was an editor in New Hampshire, and all of a sudden she can, like, tell people why they're sick. So she said, "You know what? Instead of trying to micromanage God, why don't you just listen to God?" And I was like, again,
Oh,
whoa. When your mentor tells you to, like, open your eyes in a different way, you listen. And so again, that
Wow.
was ego. I was edging God out. I was thinking I knew better. She's like, the divine has your resume. Why don't you let them decide? It's like, okay. So I can still tell stories, but I'm doing it in a very different way. It's coming from a different program, if that makes
Wow.
sense. You
So
know,
your life is less storytelling, more just owning the gifts that we all have been given, but
Mhm.
you're demonstrating it now to everyone that comes across you, so that they can start to do it for themselves. It sounds
Well,
like.
there's still a ton of storytelling. So I believe that we
Okay.
can heal through storytelling and that everybody has a story. So
Okay.
I actually started a nonprofit called Storytelling Education Project. It's the acronym is STEP. And in STEP, we do live events where people get up and they share things that maybe they would have been scared to talk about had they not had a
Mm.
supportive community to do it. And then other people hear these stories. Like just this morning, we had a Zoom with my social club annual membership community. And we had an author named John St. Augustine who's had 2 near-death experiences. He helped Oprah start her Harpo Radio. So he's,
Wow.
worked with all the great ones. But what's more important to him is just like telling, what he walked from Chicago to Michigan and Michigan to Chicago, and learned a lot along the way when you walk that many miles, and it's truly about healing. When you heal yourself, then you can help heal others. And I think that we forget we do so much outside in, and it's really an
Yeah.
inside out job.
Yeah.
So trying to come from a place of courage is what's important, and people get courage by hearing other stories. So I'm still super passionate about storytelling. And I think it can heal the world. If, look at news used to be storytelling. That's how news was
Mm.
done. There were no newspapers. It was like they couldn't even chisel it onto templates, right? They had to just sit by the fire and listen to story after story after story. And that's how
Yeah.
history was passed down. And that's how family wisdom was passed down. And that's how the Bible was compiled. And that's, that is I feel like at the core of everything, it's all
Hmm.
it's all storytelling, but we have a responsibility to make sure it's accurate so it doesn't turn into like a bad game of telephone.
Yeah.
You
So
know what I mean?
I appreciate what you're saying about storytelling, and I agree that it would give someone the courage, right? Like, you're telling your story over many, many years of embracing something that felt really bizarre to you at first, right? So that story in itself that you're telling is really, really gives someone else possibly the courage to say, like, oh my gosh, yeah, my hands do that too, and I
Right.
didn't know why. And so I guess if they were going to take the next step to use storytelling as healing,
Mhm.
how would they do that? How does that work? I mean, obviously in therapy, people tell us their stories, but it often more feels like telling me what they don't want, right? Rather than what they do
Mhm.
see as the lessons and the gifts from those stories.
Right.
So how do you encourage people to use the story as a healing mechanism?
Well, I think again, intention, right? So if my intention of telling the story is so that I can heal and help someone
Mm,
else heal, that's going to land really differently than from a wounded victim place
love
of
it.
I want other people to suffer because I suffered and I'm going to keep
Mm,
telling the story. And as Carolyn Mace would call it, that becomes your woundology. It's your tattoo. I was abused as a child. I got knocked up
yes,
in high school. I was kicked by my brother. I was this, I was that. I was in a shitty, sorry, I don't know if I can swear. I was in a bad
sure.
marriage, whatever. So it's like, okay, bottom line is are you going to tell your story so that other people feel the pain, or are you going to tell your story so that other people can heal from the pain? And that
Mm,
is, I think, only comes from you healing your pain. Again, it goes back to Carolyn May. She told me this one story about a Native American who they believe that you should tell your story 3 times. And that was enough because if you did it more than that, it would make you sick and then it would become your woundology and it would take you down.
who said that?
Carolyn Mace, Myss. Yeah,
Yeah,
she
she
talks about
lives
that.
she lives in my town, doesn't she?
Absolutely, she lives in
Oh
Oak
my
Park.
god, so I love what you're saying, because this applies so much to me, to mental health, because when people come in and repeat the same story and they talk about it as from a victim space, I agree with you, it is not healing. Their
Mhm,
intention is to come and find a place sometimes to feel that it's feel that their story was okay, maybe, or to feel like help me cope and tolerate with this story, but it's not healing. And that is seriously why I want to do this podcast and why now I want you to be a therapist, because I think you could help us understand the storytelling aspect is maybe we're doing some damage by letting people continue to tell this story in such a sad
Right.
way rather than encouraging people to tell their story from a healing space. Like my intention to sit with my therapist is to possibly
Mhm.
offer something that they can heal from. Like what a freaking difference
Right.
those sessions would be, Jen.
Well,
Ah,
and if crying is healing, they have to cry. Sometimes you
yeah,
have to cry. And
yeah,
sometimes just telling it to a therapist once is great. And that's
yeah,
all they needed. And it's like
yeah,
a balloon that just goes off into the air. Phew. But if I was in talk therapy for years, I felt crappy afterwards. All I did was complain. It was just a place to complain where that wasn't at home. And
yes,
and they just nodded and took notes and then sent me on my way and took my money. And I got news for you. I did not get anything out of it after a certain amount of time.
yes,
I feel
yeah,
that therapists have a responsibility to say, honestly, look, if you want to run a marathon, you got to train for it. So do a little
mm,
more every day, do a little more digging under the hood, be honest about your part in it. And if you didn't have part, you were just, victim of this, and this, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to help others then get past it? Or are you just going to sit here and simmer? It's like
yeah,
simmering in soup or making a different meal. And, but that awareness can't come until you get some of that grief out, which does come
yeah,
from originally talking, but like
yes.
share, don't stew. you
Yeah,
know?
no, wow, those are powerful words coming from somebody that is not a therapist, but maybe should be. Because, to your point, that's what people are doing in therapy, right? Is storytelling. And to be such a professional, for lack of a better word,
Yep.
a storyteller, as well as understand how to use storytelling for healing, I think what a
Right.
cool gift. And
That's what I
really,
do without
yeah,
the letter behind my name, but that's what I try to do on Zoom every day, and when I see clients one-on-one and when I go do live events, my
yeah,
goal is to just do that. Let's heal through storytelling. Let's
yeah,
not let's not make it another, like plaque that's indented that can't be changed. We are
yes,
malleable. We're malleable and
yeah.
we're resilient. So let's succeed. Let's come out the other side of it.
Wow, so powerful. I really appreciate it. It's made me rethink a couple things about working with people. So I really appreciate the ending here.
Mhm.
Um, so thanks again for being here. And I know people can probably mostly quickly find you at jenweigel.com,
Mhm.
right? JenWeigel.com. And where else would you direct people?
Well, it's all right there, but also you can find me on Audible. So if you type in Jen
Mm,
Weigel or Jennifer Weigel, I found so many people through my audiobooks. I love it. And that's like where you can also my podcast, the Jen Weigel Show, is on everywhere you get your podcasts. So just do a Jen Weigel search and see what pops up. I say
okay.
there are no accidents. You'll find the one you're supposed to find.
All right. And that's great. You have so many mediums to work with people. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.